Congratulations on the film, the program. Although, having said that, how much credit do you deserve?
I'm not sure that I deserve much credit for the film at all. That was made by people who make films. But, I mean, I enjoyed being involved in it. It was a good experience. And, I mean, I never minded being the pariah during the Armstrong years. And because I took a lot of the criticism with a kind of a pinch of salt, I didn't feel I was doing the wrong thing. And equally, since people's perceptions have changed of what I've done, I've been getting a lot of credit, and I take the credit with the same pinch of salt that I took the criticism.
I'm very interested to know about that change of perception that you refer to.
You know, for years and years, I was the bad guy who was going after Lance Armstrong in the most unfair way. You know, I just was obsessed by this story. Why don't I leave it alone? And then I'm the dogged journalist who was pursuing the truth. Well, actually, I never stopped doing the same thing. It was just how people saw it. People weren't ready for the kind of questions that I was asking in 99 and 2000, and they weren't ready to be told that what they thought was the most life-affirming story that they'd ever encountered was actually a fraud, and the person saying it was a fraud clearly had to be a bad guy, because why would you say that unless you were a bad guy? But I never minded being considered a bad guy. I mean, Marge Simpson once said, there's no shame in being a pariah, and I felt there was no shame in being a pariah in this case.
Well, it's very good to see that you're taking your moral guidance from one of the best people around at the moment.
Yes, absolutely. No question about that. I'm a fan.
What did you think of the film?
I really enjoyed it, I have to say, and what I liked about it most of all is, I mean, ultimately I'm a journalist, and I believe that the ugly truth is better than the beautiful lie, and I think the film has been very true to the story. I think it's a very authentic representation of what went on, and that's what I like about it.
And what did you think of Chris O'Dowd's portrayal of you?
I had a real question in my mind, because I'd seen Chris O'Dowd. The only film that he'd made a real impact on me was Bridesmaids, where he played Officer Rhodes, who was a kind of a guileless, likeable, funny kind of copper in America. And I thought, yeah, Chris, you were brilliant in that, really kind of charismatic, but can you be a journalist with a bee in his bonnet? And that was my question. And then when I saw the film, that was the question I wanted answered. Could Chris O'Dowd look like a journalist who was obsessed by a story? And in my eyes, he absolutely nailed that. So I was really pleased with how he performed it. I mean, there's a moment in the film where he says to his sports editor, "The man is a cheat." And my kids, you know, they went and saw the film, and they said, "Dad, when he said that, it was like, you know, we were listening to you, because we remember you saying that, and we remember you saying it in exactly the same way that he said it." I read an interview that Chris O'Dowd did a few years ago. I didn't read it. I listened to it. It was a podcast on a website, and he talked about being in secondary school and his ambition was to be a journalist. And I kind of felt, well, he clearly had thought about journalism, and in the film, I think he really does get it in relation to, as I said, journalist with a bee in his bonnet.
I'm very keen to know how much the filmmakers let you in to advise on the movie and what the limits of that were.
Yeah, I felt that when I sold the book Seven Deadly Sins to the film company, that I should have, you know, attached my soul, because I thought that's what they'd be getting. You know, they buy your book, they buy your soul, and they do with it whatever they like. That's not how it turned out. They were much more kind of, and I use it in a guarded way, they were much more respectful of my kind of role in writing the book and my part in the story, and they kind of kept me in the loop at all times. I mean, every time they did a script, they would send it to me. Every time they made a version of the movie, I was brought down to London to see it, and they were constantly asking me for my response. And most of what I say, they very politely ignore, and some of what I said, they would take on board. And I was of the disposition that I didn't expect to be involved actually thought, yeah, that's a good idea. Maybe we should do that. There's a scene in the movie that I absolutely love. It's one where this woman, and you can see she's had a tough life, comes with her book. It's not about the bike, Lance's book, but Lance is doing a signing. And she waits in line, and then she puts the book in front of Lance. And she says, Lance, I too had cancer, and I had given up. And then she points to the book, and then this. And she said, Lance Armstrong, you are the reason I am here, as in still alive. And then she says, that's who you are. Now, throughout this little interaction, Armstrong starts by being a little bit uneasy, and then he gets very uneasy. And at the end, he can hardly look at the woman. He can't speak, because he knows at this moment that he's a dreadful fraud, and that he's duped this woman as he's duped everybody. But when he's lying to the corporate community, or when he's lying to journalists, that's easy. He can do that. But confronted one-on-one in this very human situation, he becomes totally uneasy. Now, that scene was in an early version of the movie, and then it was dropped. And I spoke to Stephen Frears, and I spoke to producer Tim Bevan, and I said, that was one of my favourite scenes. How could you take it out? Well, lo and behold, when the final version was made, that scene was back in. And maybe I'm deluding myself, and maybe it was always going to go back in, but I feel it might have gone back in because I complained about it being left out. so that, in a way, was the kick that I got from being involved.
I take it that you were very aware going in that when telling a factually based story, films have to condense, edit, chop, combine, and fictionalize. I want to know how you coped with that process. Did you, and if you learned a lot, and whether you felt you had to teach yourself to relent and let the filmmakers do their job?
I know it sounds kind of facile in a way to say it, but it was easier than that because Stephen Frears, the director, and Tim Bevan, the producer, and they had a team of producers. I mean, there was a woman, Kate Solomon, that I dealt with all the time, and they were actually obsessed with making their film as true to the story as they could. That was their starting point. We want this to be a really factual representation of the story, like almost they wanted it to have a documentary feel to it. I mean, they'd made a movie called United 93 about that 9/11 plane that crashed in rural Pennsylvania, and when the passengers overwhelmed the terrorists and crashed that plane into rural Pennsylvania to stop it crashing anywhere else, and they made that film brilliantly in terms of how they represented that moment of that story. And I think they had exactly the same attitude in this Armstrong movie. They wanted it to be a proper representation of what happened, to be journalistically strong. And I was pushing at an open door because that's what I wanted too. There's certain things they couldn't know, and there had to be an element of Hollywood in it. And what I'm saying here is, for example, they knew that Lance and his teammates had doped on their own bus in the middle of the Tour de France. In other words, they're coming from the end of the stage, like Floyd Landis had written this, other writers had confirmed it happened. They stopped the bus, they pretended they had a breakdown, they put their blood bags hanging from hangers, and they all start doing their transfusions, which is obviously blood doping. They do this on the side of the road in the middle of the Tour de France. Now, the bit that the film can't know is what conversation were they having at that moment when that was going on. So they fabricate the conversation. And to me, that's fine, because the conversation is not what's important. What's important is that the team had become so kind of audacious in its doping that it would literally dope by the side of the road when people are driving past in their cars. Tour de France fans saying, look, there's the US postal bus. That's the coach of the champion, Lance Armstrong. Oh, they're probably inside. They're inside doping.
Do you think the film might actually rouse sympathy for Lance Armstrong?
Yes, I do. And I've already experienced that. I've been at multiple screenings, and I've had friends of mine come out and say, you know what, David, I have to admit, I've always had a sneaking regard for Lance, and now that's heightened having watched the movie. And so, yes, the answer to your question is a definite yes.
Do you mind?
Who like that? Pardon?
Do you mind?
No, absolutely not. I think that's one of the achievements of the film. I mean, it should be a film that shows Lance Armstrong in all its complexity.
There's that scene where your editor makes a very emphatic point that he will not, under any circumstances, print a story that is not backed up with 100% irrefutable proof. Now, I had to laugh at that scene, and I think you know why I had to laugh at that scene. It felt like the film was reminding us that there is a type of journalism that is dying, and we see it everywhere now.
Yes. That's absolutely right. Investigations are very expensive, and they're likely to get you in trouble if you're saying important things. But for me, the key kind of importance of that scene is that if my editor was saying to me, if you're going to make accusations about this guy, you better back it up with evidence. And I see now there are people in the Tour de France and there are people in other sporting events who are being accused without there being any evidence, and that's wrong. It doesn't matter that we've been betrayed before. When we look at sporting events now, it's fine for us to be skeptical, but we shouldn't be accusing people unless we have good reasons for accusing them, and good reasons come in the form of evidence.
It was like that scene was reminding us that this film is a period movie about journalism as well as about...
But, just one thing on that. I was at a press conference in Geneva, and this is an important point. Dick Pound is delivering a report that's from the World Anti-Doping Agency saying that Russia has had a pandemic of doping over the last 20 years. He's saying this report is based on the work of a German investigative journalist, Hayo Seppelt. And everything that Seppelt did in his television documentary about doping in Russia was correct. It was journalism that led the investigation into doping in Russia. So, although it's been under siege, proper journalism, it's not dead, and it's never been more relevant than it is now.